needed to begin. Some of you that are aficionados remember being here in Julia Richmond one night, I think the last time I spoke. And I came out to start to speak, and I was uptight for one reason or another, who knows. And to cover it, I usually have routines. And I started to cover it. And if you remember, somebody up there, after about 3 minutes, yelled, "Ram Dass, my heart hurts." And it cut through my bullshit so fast. It really brought us together, and it started the evening off. And it turned into a beautiful evening. Does anybody remember that? Those of you that have been traveling with me for a long time, you may be surprised at my new costume. I'm chairman of the board of the Seva Foundation, and this is as straight as I could get. This is take it off, it's the same schnook it always was. Oh boy, it's such fun to play all these games. It all seems real for a moment. What I usually do, and I don't assume this will be any different, is share notes of what's been happening. I always talk about myself, it turns out, but those of you that know that it isn't really me, it's us. And I just use myself as a case study that I know better than I know everybody else's case study. Because what awes me is how parallel our journeys are. And how much, when I'm going through something and I think, boy, this is really leading edge stuff, I meet somebody and they say, gee, that's just what's been happening to me. Just to put you at ease with an old familiar story about that one. You recall that story about when in the 70s, when everybody came and they all wore white and smiled a lot, and they were all between 15 and 25? That was who the audience was in those days. And if you remember the story about that in the front row, there was one woman sitting there who was about 70, and she was wearing a hat with little strawberries and cherries on it, artificial. And she was wearing a print dress and black Oxfords, responsible Oxfords. And she had a black patent leather bag. And I thought, she's obviously somebody's relative, because everybody else was very different than she was. So I started to talk for the group, and in those days we all knew. You know, that was in the 60s and 70s, we all knew. And everybody didn't know, but we knew. And many of us knew because we had shared initiation rites, chemical or otherwise, mostly chemical. So I would tell a story about what happened to me, and everybody would nod, and I'd look over and she was nodding. And I thought, how does she know? So I told a further out story, like the last time I was stoned on the beach in Mexico and standing by the ocean, and I lost my body and the thread broke, and she's going like this, you know. And I figure, maybe she's got a neck problem, you know. And I got absolutely obsessed with what was happening in her consciousness. And so I'd tell far things and look to see what she was doing. And at the end of the lecture, I kind of looked at her and smiled and smiled. And finally, she came up to me. And she said, oh, I just want you to know, what you said was just fine. I agreed with everything you said. How did you know? What is it you've done that you can know these things? And she leaned forward very conspiratorially and she said, I crochet. That's when I knew that the game was bigger than I thought it was. And it turns out, if you look at the audience now, it is much more heterogeneous than it was in those days. And we're all gathered, I'm saying the same thing I was saying 20 years ago. And yet, here we all are hearing, and we didn't all come here through any one method. Isn't that far out? Just to think about that. Because in the 60s, we thought there was a method. And here we are in the 80s seeing that it's very overdetermined and that a lot of people are sharing shifts in awareness and are interested in consciousness and spirit for a lot of different reasons. Well, for those of you that haven't been to one of these before, I'll give you the quickest thumbnail sketch of why. In the 60s, in March 6, 1961 to be exact, Timothy Leary gave me psilocybin, and it changed my life. It changed my life in the sense that it undercut the models I had of who I thought I was. All the socialization and child development that had left me with a very strong somebodyness, it cut that out. And of course there was fear in losing that familiar identity. But there was always also wonder, because I touched a place in myself that was, it was behind all my social roles. And it was a presence. Instead of being good or this or that or achiever or anything, I experienced a place in myself where I just say, I am. Not I am this or I am that, just I am. And there were other qualities of that experience. There was a feeling of familiarity to it. It was a feeling, even though I had not been in that space since probably childhood before I developed my conceptual structures of mind, that place was extremely familiar to me. There was another quality to it, was that I experienced a quality of my heart that was incredibly compassionate. I looked at form as if I was standing behind the forms of the universe, and I looked out at the forms, and it was as if I saw the preciousness of all the forms, the incredible beauty of the stuff of life. It was like God's paintbrush at work. I looked at people and they were so beautiful. I looked at things and they were beautiful. I remember doing a book in the 60s with Sidney Cohen. He was the head of the government drug commission. He was the good guy and I was the bad guy. And we did a book together for New American Libraries called LSD. And we had photographs in it. And when we went to pick the photographs for the book, he picked all the photographs showing all these people on drugs kind of wiped out. And I picked all the ones showing people looking at flowers and roaming in the fields and stuff. And there was only one picture we agreed on. It was a picture of a guy lying on the floor looking at some spilled Coca-Cola. Okay? And he liked that because it showed that under drugs, people got so trivial and their minds got so caught in nothing. And I liked it because this person was seeing that in everything there is everything. That in the spilled drop of Coca-Cola is the entire universe. And I saw just the holography of the universe. It's incredible. Well, a few hours later, all I had was the memory. I came down, and that began a journey. That experience imprinted so deeply in my mind because it showed me who I was that I hadn't known I was. And yet it was familiar, and it was my true self. And yet as the drug wore off and my ego structures reimposed themselves like a prison of my mind and came back to my familiar definition of myself, I felt trapped in it, and yet I couldn't push away the prison. I didn't know the mantra or the secret thing to do or what to do, and I came back into my Zumbak suit. And I think it preoccupied me because it felt like it was my true being. And I felt like I was gypped. I was gypping myself not to have access to that. So I did what many others of you did and other people did, was I tried every chemical possibility to try to stabilize that state. I mean, if you took this and then followed it with this, and you did it under these conditions with this person, reading this book from the Tibetan, and you did it after fasting for so many days and standing on your left foot, it would work, see? And I still came down, and I kept coming down and coming down and coming down for about 7 years, through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of explorations. And then I went to India, and I met Maharaji, my guru, and I met a being who didn't come down. Now, in the course of that, I learned a lot of interesting things about coming down and getting high, and I think that this is familiar to many of you, but it's just a run-through of simple stuff, which was that what high means is free, and what free means is you don't stand anywhere. And you all remember my routine with the channels on the selector, where when you're on channel 1 and you look out at the reality of the universe, you see physical bodies, male, female, tall, thin, old, young, dark, light, etc. And then you flip the next flip and you see everybody as personalities, manic, depressive, hysteric, achiever, mother, truck driver, social roles, all that stuff, lawyer, achiever, eager person, responsible, irresponsible, laid back, you know, and everybody, most 99.9% of the world treats those two planes as real, as absolutely real. And when you say to somebody, who are you, they answer in terms of, I am a man, or I am a woman, or I am a happy person, or I'm a mother, or they do something in terms of social role or physical body. Social, psychological, physical. Well, then if you shift to channel 3, there's only 12 of us. You're either an Aries, a Leo, or Sagittarius, and that gives you new power, and you suddenly see things you didn't see before, and it's a whole new ball game of reality. And then if you flip one more flip, and the refreshing thing about flipping to that astral plane is you suddenly see that the physical plane and the psychological plane were only relatively real. You thought they were so real, and suddenly, by going into the astral plane, you see that they were just more reality, but not the only thing, because you're now in a new one. And after years of being only in channel 1 and 2. Look how you suffer if you're only in channel 1 and 2, because the body dies, so you're going to be frightened, because you're going to die. But now go to channel 4. And now you look into the eyes of another person and you see another being just like you looking back at you. They're just packaged differently. They're packaged in a different body and a different personality and a different astrology, but behind it, there it is, another person just like you. What are you doing in there? How did you get into that one? Yeah? Because you see a similar being, another what the Christians call soul. You see another soul that has incarnated, taking a different trip, and as a result, because of the personality and the thought forms and the body, they're having a whole, and the parents and the economics, they're having a whole different set of world experiences. They're going through the same school, but they're under a curriculum that is entirely different than the curriculum you're under, because they're going in programmed differently. And when you meet another person behind their stuff, it's quite awesome when they recognize it and you recognize it, because you at the moment are freed from the dance. And it can happen anyway. You walk into a bank to the bank teller and you look into the eyes of the bank teller And there, instead of a bank teller looking back at you, is a being who is being a bank teller. That's different. Are you with me? Is it too? And then if you flip the next one, you're looking into yourself, looking into yourself, looking into yourself. There's only one of it. That's the stuff of the universe. That's the tiniest unit of energy that pervades all things. It's the one. It's the Shema Yisroel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. There's only one of it. And then if you flip it once more, it disappears. You disappear. The whole thing disappears. There's nothing to see. There's nobody to see it. And that's all. That's also the Shema. That's the void. That keeps the Buddhists happy. Now, you can use any one of those channels. See, you get, as you go up the ladder, each channel you get to gives you more power than you had the one before. Because if you're a soul, you are free of, and you're not identified with your body and your psychological stuff, or even your mythical stuff, your astrology. You're free. You're looking around and you're sort of at play with all that stuff. Relatively free. But you're still busy being a separate somebody, a soul. And the secret of the game, finally, as I understand it at this point in my development, is that there is nowhere to stand. And I used to think for years that getting high meant getting rid of the lower planes and getting to the higher planes. Now I understand you only do that in order to realize that the lower planes are relatively real rather than absolutely real. But to be free, you can't stand in the higher planes any more than you can stand in the lower planes. And that came home to me in a very far out way. I have a friend who, when I've introduced this friend, I've always said this sort of thing because most of you say you are not prejudiced people. And if I say I have a friend, you'd say I'd like to meet them if they're your friend. And you could handle any friend I could lay on you in terms of weirdness. Well, my friend Emmanuel hasn't got a body, see? And a lot of people say, well, I don't know about that, see? Well, he's my friend. I mean, it's not your problem, but I don't know whether you have imaginary playmates, but I do. I have lots of them. They enrich my life immensely. And Emmanuel has a great sense of humor. He's absolutely delightful. You remember when I asked Emmanuel, I work with people that are dying. What should I tell them? He said, tell them it's absolutely safe. I mean, who wouldn't love somebody like that? He said, it's like taking off a tight shoe. Dying is like taking off a tight shoe. Because where he's looking, he did it already, and he's sitting around, he knows. And he's saying, what are you making such a big deal out of the body? It's just an incarnation, no big deal. Well, what happened was that I had gotten, throughout those years, I was busy sort of putting down my physical body and my personality. I was so neurotic, and my body was not quite what I wanted it to be, and I just figured, I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to get high. And then at one point I said to Emmanuel, what is my work? What should I be doing on earth? And he said, Ramdas, why don't you're in a school, why don't you try taking the curriculum? He said, why don't you try being human? I'd never thought of that. Because as far as I was concerned, my job was to push away my humanity and to get high. And I'd get high in any way I knew, and then I'd see it all, and I'd be wise and far out. And then I'd go back to my room, and I'd come back into my humanity. And I'd yick. And so I realized that that I didn't take an incarnation by error. In fact, there are no errors in the game at all. Not any errors in form at all. All form is lawful. It's all lawful. There's no errors. And what's far out is as long as you identify with that part of you that is in form, You are merely a lawful happening. You can talk free will, but it's nonsense. That's not free will. That's all lawful unfolding. When you decided to come here tonight, that thought didn't just come out of the void. It comes out of this, which led to this, which led to that, which led to that. All your thoughts, your body, this is a 1931 model that is decaying in a perfectly lawful and orderly fashion. And as long as I identify with all of this, I am merely lawfully unfolding. And Emmanuel said to me, you have your choice. Do you want to be the victim or the creator? Because as long as you are the incarnation only, you are the victim. You are being had by the law. And you feel yourself caught in stuff that's just happening to you. You didn't ask for it. If you think you are the form. But if you flipped into these other levels of consciousness, outside of form, and met yourself behind form, which isn't describable, you can't say, I am a that, because that's a form. It's very frustrating. Because you can point at it, but you can't describe it, because every description isn't what it is. But as you begin to acknowledge that part of you that is not in form, and even to rest in it, you begin to experience what it feels like to be that which created yourself. Then there's only one of it, and it creates. It is creation by its very nature. You could call it God, or you could call it creation, and you're it. And standing nowhere means you are both the creator and the created. You are both the creator and the victim. And you stretch to be able to handle that incredible paradox. And you watch your own drama unfolding, and you are both in it, if you're accepting your humanity and taking the curriculum, as Emmanuel suggests, and you're not in it. That part of you that is not in it appreciates the perfection of the way it's unfolding. Now you say, perfection? Hey, man, look at the homeless. Look at the suffering. Look at the terrorism. Look at the bomb. Look at my stomach. Look at, you're going to call that perfection? You out of your mind? This guy, what a Pollyanna-ish guy he is. There's another paradox. The paradox is when you stand back and you look at the forms of the universe, you see law. And you see the law of karma, it's called, or whatever you want to call it. That's one way of calling it. The law of the unfolding of cause and effect, in which everything is related to everything else in the universe. Every blade of grass bending is related to everything else. And you stand back and you are awed by it, and you look and you see your body and your personality and your history and your family is all part of it. And you appreciate the perfection of the unfolding of it all, including the suffering. But if you just do that, which you do up here with your third eye, your heart, which is your emotional heart, your human heart, says, what kind of an insensitive, callous person are you? Because if you're only up here, somebody trips in front of you, you say, karma. Okay? Okay. But if you're just down here, you look around and the suffering stinks, and you try to do something about it, but it is so immense, the amount of suffering, that you got to fill the dike there and it's leaking there, and you got to fill it there and it's leaking there. And where are you going to do it? What are you going to do it? You're on the good guy mailing list just like I am, you know. Which one do you write your check to? You know, is it the whales this week? Is it the battered women? Is it the... On and on it goes. Nicaraguans, Guatemalan refugees? Who is it? There's the paradox. The paradox is that suffering is part of the plan of it all, and suffering stinks. And as a human being, you do what you can to end suffering because of the compassionate nature of your heart. At the same moment, you know that it's perfect, including your wanting to get rid of it. Can you hear that? It's a far-out relationship, and it's important because if you don't have that balance and you try to help people, you will burn out. There's no doubt about it. Because you can't do it. You can't do enough. Every time you got to do this one, that one. I've been working with people that are dying for some years now. And I must tell you that while I wouldn't lay suffering on anybody, I have sat with people that are suffering incredibly with various kinds of cancer and other kinds of physical conditions. And I will tell you that I have watched people with egos that are like cinder blocks. They're so heavy and thick and busy with themselves and their self-pity and their anger and their And I've watched the suffering eat away and eat away and eat away and eat away. And then I've watched, it's like the shell cracks. And it's like the spirit is born. And I see them often very close to death, and they're like great, wise, spiritual beings. And I didn't think there was a chance of a snowball in hell that person was ever going to come up for air spiritually in this lifetime. And the suffering was what did it, and yet I would never lay the suffering on them. The interesting question is, who did? And the answer, as Emmanuel points out, and that feels very valid to me, intuitively, is that the suffering I'm having, I laid on myself. I am the creator, and I am the created. I designed my game, and now I'm living it out. Now the question is, when I'm living it out, do I forget that I designed it? Say, that you rat. See? Then another part of you says, yes. I want to complain. All right. It's an incredible dialogue, and it's a dialogue inside ourselves. And what stretching is required to embrace that incredible paradox. Once you appreciate that there is freedom and that you have tasted the possibility of freedom, you may try to forget it, but you can't, as you've all found out, I suspect. And it haunts you and compels you. And at first, what you do is you try to get free in off moments, because the rest of the time you're busy living life. See? But maybe on a Saturday night or maybe Sunday morning at church, you'll go in to get free for an hour, okay? I've got an hour between, I don't want to screw up business on Monday morning, but Sunday I'll go in and get free. But then you start to get greedy for the freedom. I mean, if there's one addiction that outlasts all the others,